Yeah, I think the SEC should be either restructured or abolished because of what they have done to poorer people. Poorer people have no way of getting richer if they can't participate in making small investments in something that's risky. They don't get a chance to get that first rung on the ladder. And I think those rules from 1933 and 1940 are outdated. And tokenization can explode and really great things can happen. Our US economy and our global economy will really take off if the small investor gets to participate in small companies.
And welcome to the Venture to Victory podcast, where we look at the entrepreneurial journey from startup to exit. And man, am I excited today. I've got the one and only Tim Draper in the house. Tim, how you doing?
Doing great, Tim. Thanks for having me on your show. This is great.
This is really awesome. I'm honored to have you on here too, Tim. So for anyone out there listening to this podcast, if you're one of those rare few who have never heard of Tim Draper, just type his name in Google, Wikipedia, ChatGPT, or Grok, and you get something fun like Tim's known for his bold, high-risk, high-reward investment style. That's how ChatGPT looks at you, Tim, today. Sounds a little cowboyish, but
it's funny. I'm surprised they're not saying he's an actor and a songwriter and a teacher.
Yeah, well, I think that's what prompting is for. You can keep on prompting and you can get anything you like. But I thought it was a pretty cool statement to hear. Look, the reality is that Tim is one of the greatest tech investors, in my opinion, of our time. And just look at a couple of these huge successes. We've got Hotmail, Skype, Baidu, Tesla, SpaceX, Ring, Twitter, DocuSign, Coinbase, Robinhood, Ancestry.com, and Twitch. And I'm not kidding you when I say we're barely touching the surface. I think what also is really cool about Tim, I was so excited, is that he's rare that he comes from an actual lineage of venture capitalists, starting with his grandfather all the way down now to his children. He's the founder of the venture capital firm DFJ, Draper Fisher Jurvetson, Draper Associates. He's the founder of Draper University. And he even has his own exciting reality show called Meet the Drapers, where startup founders get to pitch their business to various family members and guest celebrities. It's a very cool, fun show. And to me, some people tend to have told me, oh, it's kind of like Shark Tank, but I look at it like more of the American Idol for investing. It's very positive, upbeat, it's exciting, and it's a really fun show. And it shows on YouTube. I think you're going to be starting your 7th season, Tim, coming up.
You can see the 7th season, most of it online now. We've already filmed season 8 and we're starting season 9. So they just need to go through editing. We're really excited about it. And it just keeps going bigger and bigger and bigger in more and more countries. So very exciting. And it has hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of millions of people have access to it, and tens of millions watch it. So very exciting.
It was funny. I was watching the finale of the last season, and it was funny because you're not looking for multi-billion-dollar markets. You're looking for trillion-dollar markets. And I thought that was, wow, I don't think you could get much bigger than that, but that's pretty darn exciting.
Well, once Tesla became a $1 trillion company and we seeded it. And so I've always thought, okay, well, that's the new hurdle. That's where we're going.
Absolutely. Go big. Well, go big or go home. So we're in a new world. Tim's also been a big proponent of Bitcoin. We're going to touch on that. I love that Bitcoin tie.
Yeah, thank you.
We were talking pre-pod. I have a shirt that says "The Future Looks Bright" from the PD podcast. Shout out to those guys. And Tim said the future looks bright too. He held up his tie and said for Bitcoin, and we're going to touch base on that as the pod gets going. Tim, to finish off with a quick intro, Tim got his undergrad degree in double electrical engineering from Stanford and his MBA from Harvard Business School. Tim, I'm so excited to have you. So I wanted to start with a quick little personal story. I don't know if you remember this, Tim, but my first exposure to you in person, Jamie and Michael Montgomery had invited me many, many years to one of their big conferences. A lot of fun. You remember, You had great entertainment. Everybody was there. I think it was down in Santa Monica, one of the big hotels. And 15, 20 years ago, you were the keynote speaker. And it was right at that lunchtime. We had 1,000 people waiting to see your big presentation, your slideshow. Right. This was going to be the slideshow you prepped on kind of the history of venture capital. And of course, we get up there and guess what happens? The AV equipment set up by the hotel was just a total disaster. They could not get it working. And finally, as the inmates began to get restless, she said, I'm just going to go old school and wing it. And I'll never forget, because you started off that example of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella funding Christopher Columbus as the first true venture capitalist. You went through the whole thing, and I kept on thinking, this is how you do it. Grace under pressure. And if anyone was an aspiring entrepreneur, a little bit nervous about making a pitch to an investor and worrying about technical issues and all those things you can never expect happen. Well, here's the investor himself dealing with it. And here's how it happens. And that was my first look.
I thought you were going to, I go to Jamie's conference almost every year.
Yeah, he's great.
I thought you were there because you were saying there's this big thing. I was thinking, oh no, he was there the year I rapped. I created a rap song about venture capital and entrepreneurship, and I rapped it out. And it probably wasn't my most, my greatest moment on stage, but I went to the end. I went to the bitter end.
I think
anyway, so good. Yeah, of course. Oh, I teach that in our school. In fact, we have technology go down on purpose so people can experience that and say, oh, okay, this is down. Now I got to do what I was going to do. I interrupt them when they're, I do this on the show too. I interrupt them when they're memorizing. They've got to totally memorize, because I want to throw them off their game so that they get a chance to tell me what really matters. Tell me about their real business, not just what they have practiced over and over and over. So I'm glad I was able to do it, because I'm teaching my students to do it at Draper University.
Well, I think at the time we were still on Trio. So I don't know if the iPhone was out with the camera. So I don't know how many people captured that rap song back in the day. But today it would be lights out and it'd be on social media 20 seconds later. I love that idea. I mean, for any entrepreneurs who are thinking about doing a pitch, you just heard it from the man himself. You've got to pretend the worst can happen. You've got to prep for that and be able to handle it. So I thought it was really, really fascinating, Tim. So, hey, I wanted to start off by talking about something a little bit fun that makes you unique again, which is kind of the whole Draper lineage involved in venture capital. I guess we could say for the Drapers, venture capital is a true family affair. Your grandfather founded one of the first VC firms in Silicon Valley, followed by your dad, Bill, who's 97 and sharp as a whip, God bless, who co-founded Sutter Hill Ventures that we all know about. And of course, you started DFJ. And now 3 of your sons are working in 3 different venture capital firms. So I'd love to know, what was it like growing up at the breakfast table? I know your son wrote this cool book called Breakfast with Pops, but when you were growing up, were you guys always talking about deals and deal making and investments, and that got you inspired? What was that like that kind of lit that initial flame? And how did that get pushed down to your kids as well?
Looking back, I had 2 older sisters, and they pretty much dominated the conversation at dinner. My dad had a lot of fun at work, and I think that it passed down to me. He also really honored the entrepreneur, and I've always had great respect for the entrepreneur. And actually, coming out of business school, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I guess I became an entrepreneur in venture capital, and I guess I started a school and I started a show, but I didn't go after the technology that I was exposed to when I was coming out of business school, because I had too many different ideas. And so clearly somebody who's peripatetic or has short attention span needs multiple ideas And venture capital is much better for us than being an entrepreneur where you have a pure focus, you go after it, and you do it until you die. And we have great respect for entrepreneurs in our family, and it turned out that I was well suited for venture capital, so it worked out very well for me. And as for my kids, I think they saw how much fun I was having. And 3 of the 4, I think all 4 of them have started businesses, and 3 of the 4 have become venture capitalists. Yeah. So really exciting that, at some point in their lives, they started businesses so that they had a little bit of that entrepreneurial fire in them too.
Do you feel like that's almost a prerequisite way, because when you're investing or you're looking at a company from the outside, even if you're involved as a board member, there's nothing like that pressure, that undefined pressure on the entrepreneur to make successful, to deal with these issues. And I almost feel like an investor, really understanding that at a visceral level, it's almost like you should be required to do one startup so that you're more, not only empathetic, but more understanding of kind of those dynamics when you're building a company.
Well, good venture capitalists have come out of a lot of different fields. Some are entrepreneurs. My family is very empathetic with entrepreneurs. We understand what they're going through. So if you're a Draper, you're generally pretty empathetic. You realize entrepreneurship is an extraordinary field where really extraordinary people are trying to accomplish something that's beyond the grasp of most humans. But there have been great venture capitalists who come out of journalism. Mike Moritz came out of journalism. There have been great ones who came out of regular. Bob Cagle was a great venture capitalist, came out of GM, and so they all have had some interesting platform from which to go after it. I think the best venture capitalists, though, really get into the people, the technology, and the markets, whereas the worst venture capitalists are only concerned about the money.
Yeah. No.
And so we tend to think of all startups as, okay, how big and dynamic is this market? Is it currently dominated by an oligopoly or a monopoly that's providing bad service at a high price? And the reason that that's important is that it creates an umbrella from which these entrepreneurs can come participate in that market. And then new technologies that start to apply to multiple markets or multiple industries. And those would be like the internet shows up or the computer shows up. What does it affect? The internet shows up. What does it affect? What industries does that transform? It went after everything from, housing to taxis to search libraries to telephones. It changed a whole bunch of things. Bitcoin is changing commerce, finance, the entire economy. AI is going after self-driving cars, taxi drivers. It's going after robotics. It's changing the natures of a lot of different industries. In fact, we're even using AI in about 8 different ways. I have 4 digital twins myself.
Am I talking to the real Tim Draper?
You will never know.
I will never know.
Actually, you will know. You'll see.
Well, you got to hold your hand up. I know the hands.
My digital twin is much better looking and much smarter, makes fewer mistakes. I have a couple of really good digital twins. You'll know if I'm not making any mistakes that it's my digital twin.
That's awesome.
And so AI is changing a bunch of things. So when you get a new technology, it starts to affect multiple industries. And then we look at the people and we say, okay, are they well suited for this? Are they dedicating their life to it? Are they, high drive, high intelligence, are they people will want to work with, or aspire to work with? Aspire to work with might be better, because Elon is probably very difficult to work with, but he says we're going to Mars, and that is great aspirations for some of the best engineers in the world. That kind of person can really attract some of the best people in the world to come work for them and with them.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I was thinking about on the investing side for a minute. As we kind of mentioned in the intro, that you've backed some incredibly transformative, companies over the years. And is there like a single common thread that you see in these types transformational entrepreneurs? We mentioned Elon, and how do you know when you've actually found one?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people ask me, how do you know this? How do you know that? The answer is we don't. We know enough to know that they won't all work. And we have to understand that and live with it. So if you are not comfortable with failing, venture capital is not a good place for you, at least at the early stage. Later stage, they don't fail a lot in the later stage. Their returns aren't as good, but they don't fail that much. So dealing with knowing that there's big uncertainty. So that's the only thing we know. What we look for, though, and what we have found over the years is that entrepreneurs with sort of a great self-confidence or where they can be certain of the future that they're bringing people along to, while others might not be, they can have some certainty. They know that it may not work too, but they have enough certainty that they can attract good people, and that they have, in effect, a good path to success, a clear path to success, and the flexibility to change that path if things aren't going the way they want them to. Because the biggest companies in the world were pivots. They all started in one direction, and to get to $1 billion, you probably don't have to pivot. But to get to $1 trillion market, you got to pivot a lot of times. You've got to be very quick on your feet. You've got to understand markets, what's going on in the world, and you've got to make changes. You got to adapt to new technologies and new markets and market dynamics where different companies within an industry are fighting you.
Yeah, that belief is something special. You look at someone like a Michael Saylor or Alex Karp, where no matter what
Saylor, unbelievable. That commitment. I thought I had commitment to Bitcoin. That commitment to Bitcoin, where he basically has turned his corporation into a vehicle to buy Bitcoin.
It is.
By the way, brilliant strategy. If I had a public company and I saw him doing that, I'd do it too.
Well, I love the fact that no matter what's happening in the world, no matter, Bitcoin, crypto is an area where the emotions run very high because it's so volatile, and people say they can handle volatility, but then when they actually see it, they're terrified if it drops 10 or 20 or 30%.
I think you're missing something. I think the volatility is in the dollar, because if you look at what's happened to the dollar over time against Bitcoin, it just keeps going down. Yeah. And it's very volatile, and it just keeps going down against Bitcoin. One Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin.
Right.
But the dollar over time against Bitcoin has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. When I first got involved with Bitcoin, it was a dollar was almost equivalent of a Bitcoin. It was $4 for a Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so that's Bitcoin for $4. Now a Bitcoin is what, $82,000. That means that the dollar has gone from 0.25 Bitcoin to 0.0000001 or 8 Bitcoin. It is falling fast.
Yeah.
So if you're worried about a volatility in a currency, I'd get out of the dollar.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking more of like the ETF. So investors who don't really understand Bitcoin as a technology and understand the analogy you just said about as a hedge against, dollar currency debasement, they're just looking at price exposure and they're terrified. And
Be very relaxed if you think of it in terms of Bitcoin. If you think of it in terms of dollars, you're gonna freak out because the dollars
right.
keep going down against Bitcoin. Bitcoin keeps going up.
I agree. And we're going to get into a funny thing on Bitcoin, which is your first purchase in a minute. But I wanted to um, reference something that I heard you say many times, which is both it's true and it's funny. You said on many podcasts that you're wrong 50% of the time. And it's kind of it made me think deeply about the difficulty it is for people to pick winners. And as someone who runs a national executive search firm where you're placing C-level execs and founders into venture-backed companies, a lot of times I see those candidates, they're trying to pick that one winner, essentially, like we said earlier, party of one, right? By picking that one company that they think is going to be really great. What advice would you give to some of these aspiring tech leaders who are trying to decipher whether the opportunity they're looking at, the company they're looking to join, is really going to be that next big transformational opportunity?
Yeah, I think everybody's got to look inside themselves and see what their risk profile is, because small businesses that don't have customers are very risky to join. Businesses that have a few customers but aren't making money are pretty risky to join. Businesses that have a lot of customers and they're making money, they're really not that risky to join. But if you're trying to make a fortune, you've got to take the bigger risk. If you want to live a nice, stable life, then joining a big company is usually a good path. However, what I noticed was coming out of business school, the first year, the first 5-year reunion, most of the people who were kind of strutting their stuff were the ones who joined the big companies and the consulting firms and investment banks. And then the 10th year, they were still sort of strutting their stuff, although they were getting a little bored. And then the 15th year, they were asking me for a job. And so the stable company isn't. The world changes pretty quickly. If you look at the companies that are the 10 highest market cap companies every decade, the turnover is something like 50%. So the biggest companies in the world seem like the most secure to join, but new technologies, new markets, new things happen. And within a decade, half of them are dethroned.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it's good to think about it as an investor. We look at it and we can diversify. We can take big risks in lots of different places. As a future employee of one of these companies, you've got to say, this is my career. Where do I fit on the risk food chain? Can I support my family even if this thing doesn't work? Those kinds of questions are, if you're young and you're just getting started, then, hey, go ahead, take a risk, see how it goes. It'll give you an experience you'll never forget. You'll be closer to the action. If you've got a family and you got responsibilities, then you figure out what you can join, what you're comfortable joining.
Yeah, it's funny, as you and I, similar age range, looking backwards, with perspective, you say, wow, you could roll the dice 5, 6 times in building a company and have them fail and still have that big success at one point. With perspective, as you age, you realize that the time to take the risk is young and to go all for it. And if it all falls apart, you've got time is the greatest currency that we really deal in. And that's, you have a lot of it when you're young. It's important.
A lot of people come to me, they say, what should I do first if I want to be an entrepreneur? And I say, be an entrepreneur.
I love that. I love that.
What if I want to be a venture capitalist? What do I do first? I say, be a venture capitalist. If I want to be a plumber, what do I do first? Be a plumber. Do what you set out to do, because you once you're on that track, if you want to be in marketing, be in marketing, because once you're on that track, that's what you learn. That's where you learn the fastest. That's where you're the most successful, because you're happy, and you're on your path. You're on your way. So whatever it is you want to be that.
Yeah. And I think what's so great about that statement too is if you do that, like you said, just be that, and it turns out you don't like that, then you find out pretty early on and you move to the next thing that you want to be.
I had a good friend who wanted to be a rock star. And he went out to be a rock star, and he just was that rock star. But he didn't hit the top of the charts. So he then became an entrepreneur. So,
yeah, what a great transition from rock. So you could go from rock star to entrepreneur. I like that. That's a perfect timeline for everybody.
Now he's a venture capitalist.
Okay, so if you want to be a venture capitalist, you start as a rock star. Yeah. and today, some venture capitalists aren't rock stars. So in their own way. Hey, Tim, so I know you've been a big proponent and pioneer around the concept of decentralization, from early bets on Bitcoin and crypto to advocacy for free markets, and even we won't get too much, but the fun stuff that we're looking at for the state of California itself. But I wanted to touch on this idea of tokenization. I've been thinking about it a lot. And what's your thoughts on how tokenization could disrupt venture capital in a way that would allow everyday investors, not just accredited ones, to participate the same way LPs do, the same way an 18-year-old or could buy crypto just through a wallet? If you could tokenize the fund itself for VC and have everybody participate, what would that be like? How would it transform the industry? It would certainly move forward in this direction of social equity, because these great opportunities and this diversification through the venture community could be available to everyone. What's your thoughts on that? And if you do think it's something that could be really cool, important, what would have to happen for that vision to become a reality?
Yeah, I think the SEC should be either restructured or abolished because of what they have done to poorer people. Poor people have no way of getting richer if they can't participate in, making small investments in something that's risky. They don't get a chance to get that first rung on the ladder. And I think those rules from 1933 and 1940 are outdated, and tokenization can explode, and really great things can happen, and our U.S. economy and our global economy will really take off if the small investor gets to participate in small companies. I mean, you can back the local grocery store. You can back the little tech company from that genius next door. You can, and instead of being in a situation where you're in the government protectorate and you're not allowed to do anything with your money until something is public, and at that point, the excitement is gone, the returns are gone. You're going to get but if you got nothing to start with, why not be able to take a few risks with it? So anyway, that's my my thinking on that, because when you started to talk about tokenization, all I thought about was the SEC for the last 4 years has gotten in our way every step of the way, and it has really destroyed the creativity of a lot of entrepreneurs in the U.S., and a lot of them have left. A lot of them have gone to Dubai and to Singapore and to other places where people are more open to allowing the little guy to invest. Venture capital should be available to the masses. Anybody should be able to participate in a venture fund. And I don't feel, we've all survived evolution. I think we're all smart enough to make decisions for our own. And I think we're missing that in trying to have a government that's too paternalistic and gets in our way. You came out, you mentioned something, and I thought this would solve a lot of problems. Here's what it is.
Okay.
Congress, when they decide what to do with all the government money, but if they don't have enough money, they just print more money, and then we have inflation. And what if Congress had a budget and the budget was tokenized, or Congress only could vote on shares of that budget? So then they'd have to decide whether they want the nuclear power plant or the aircraft carrier. They can't just say we want both. They'd have to decide whether they want to save the baby squirrel or have the river run securely through a certain city. They'd have to make those determinations because it's a limited amount of money. They have been spending as though it was an unlimited amount of money. So if you say your budget is whatever the country raised in taxes that year, the year before, and that's your budget and that's all you're going to spend, Congress, and we're tokenizing it so that you can use your tokens, spend your tokens, or just whatever you're putting in there. Congress has to take something out to make it all balance with the budget. So I think that instead of saying it's a balanced budget, why not have it be shares of the budget? So have Congress say, I fought for 3 billion shares of the budget for your, big new dam, or for your, better education system or whatever. I fought for it. But if somebody else, fought for 1 trillion shares of the budget, then your something billion shares would be diluted. And then the important things would rise to the top. People would make decisions based on the important things.
Yeah.
I think that will be, and they could do that with shares of a budget, or they can do it with tokens, which are actually kind of interesting because you could say every congressman has a certain number of tokens toward the success of, the country. And then they can aggregate tokens to make something big happen.
But fascinating idea. It's true democratization. I feel like we got to get closer to the balanced budget before that could consider. Maybe Doge will be part of that. Maybe it'll help us get closer to that point. And you've got guys like J.D. Vance and maybe whispering the ear of Trump. So I don't know if that'll come to fruition now, but it's what I like the fact is it's a new idea. This idea that, hey, we just can constantly just debase our currency. We not only spend beyond, what we take in taxes, we're essentially putting it all on a credit card bill for everybody. And so I love that idea. Hopefully, new ideas will come to flourish and they'll penetrate the government as well. So speaking of the government, I want to talk about a fun story, if you don't mind sharing, if you're cool with that. But I want to jump into one of our favorite subjects, Bitcoin, for a minute. And I love your tie. And we talked about Michael Saylor, but Michael Saylor has said in the very beginning every one of us has to put in at least 100 hours of personal education to understand Bitcoin's future potential. And I'd love to hear the story of your first big Bitcoin play in 2014, which is the purchase, I believe, of 30,000 BTC at a U.S. government auction. I'd love to hear that story. I think it's really interesting.
This was my first purchase. I tried to get, I thought I bought 40,000 Bitcoin for $250,000. And it, two things happened. One was the mining chips that were supposed to be delivered to the guy who was going to mine this at $4 a Bitcoin, was, I guess my math's wrong. It was $250,000 and it was at $6, but he was going to mine it at $4 per Bitcoin. So it would have been 60,000. But the miners front ran him. I mean, the guys who made the chip front ran him and used the chip before they sent it to him. They finally sent it to him. Bitcoin had gone up to 36. I got a bunch of Bitcoin at 36. Then this guy sent it to Mt. Gox, and it was being stored at Mt. Gox, and then it disappeared. So we lost it at Mt. Gox. So then I thought, oh, too bad. That was the end of Bitcoin. Somebody at Mt. Gox stole $600 million worth of Bitcoin. And I said, oh, wow, I thought that was really good stuff, that Bitcoin. I thought it was going to be really important. And Bitcoin only dropped about 10% on that news. And so I went, whoa. And that's where I dug deep. And I went in and I said, oh, my gosh, they're using it for, well, sure, they were using it for guns and drugs. And now they can't do that anymore because they found out the blockchain keeps perfect records.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all getting caught.
Yeah.
But then they started to use, then you saw what else they were using it for. They were using it for remittances, big companies who had to pay employees that didn't have bank accounts. They used it for the unbanked, people who in Venezuela and in deep parts of Africa that couldn't get a bank account, couldn't actually have credit or whatever. They were now a part of the world economy. And I found that it was also a way of storing value. And this guy, Sebastian Serrano, came to me and he said, yeah, Bitcoin's an important thing. And I said, why? And he said, because I live in Argentina and my family has created a fortune 3 times and lost it 3 times to currency manipulation by the government. And I'm only 30 years old, he said. And Bitcoin was a way of storing value for him. So all of a sudden there were all these new ways that Bitcoin was going to be something really important for us. Well, it's really only recently that I've felt that Bitcoin was going to be the most important global currency. And that is because, not just because, people like OpenNote are creating a way for retailers to take Bitcoin and save themselves 1 or 2% on every sale. But it's also that we all know what a Bitcoin is worth now. There are only 21 million of them. And as there are these booms and busts, there's been more consolidation, more gravitational pull toward Bitcoin. And I'm seeing the same thing I saw when Microsoft was operating. They were a platform for a while. And then they said, well, there's this interesting software called WordPerfect. We should create a competitor and put it on our operating system. And they created Word. Same thing with Lotus 1-2-3. It was doing very, very well. And they said, okay, we're going to do Excel and we're going to put it on our operating system. And so slowly but surely they took the pieces that mattered and they put them on their operating system. Same thing's happening with Bitcoin now. DeFi is now happening on Bitcoin. Smart contracts are happening on Bitcoin. Ordinals are a new word for NFTs. They're happening on Bitcoin. It's all moving toward all the important things are moving toward Bitcoin. The experimentation's happening on other tokens, but Bitcoin, it used to have a 40% market share, and then there was another boom and a bust, and then they had 50%, another boom and bust, and now it's 61%. And actually, I think with the recent bust, it's gone up to something like 64% of all crypto is Bitcoin. So it's grabbing a bigger and bigger share. The developers are working more and more and more on Bitcoin. So it's going to be really important.
Yeah. I think the ETFs are driving some of that market share too, because they're the first ones approved. There's a lot of capital influx coming into that as well. But you said 1/3 of the people in your audience, your realm, on a poll that I did on LinkedIn. Yeah.
On the poll you did, only 1/3 of them think that Bitcoin's important. And let me describe this to them.
Perfect.
Because I've noticed that the ones who are the late bloomers, the last to try things, are usually the ones who are driven by fear. So let me do something. Instead of opportunity, let me drive your fear.
Okay.
Okay, Silicon Valley Bank went out of business. When they went out of business, it was a Thursday, and I got 14 phone calls and emails from entrepreneurs who said, hey, all our money was at Silicon Valley Bank. We can't pay payroll. We can't make payroll. And we are personally liable for payroll. The board and the management is personally liable for at least 2 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks of payroll. And we can't get to it. So please do something. So I made offers to pretty much all of them, I think. And they weren't all great offers. They were draconian in some cases, but made those offers. And then the U.S. government bailed out Silicon Valley Bank, and we all know they didn't have to take my offers. So, but we all learned something. One is we've got to hedge treasury. Even in startups, we got to hedge treasury. We have to. And so I said, put some of it in a big bank. And they go, oh, yeah. And I say, okay, and put some of it in a small bank. And they say, why a small bank? I said, because the U.S. government can bail out a small bank. And then put some in Bitcoin. They say, why Bitcoin? Because if there is the domino effect that everybody was fearing when Silicon Valley Bank went out of business, and then Credit Suisse and a couple others, there could have been a real domino effect. And then you're still personally responsible for paying your payroll. And if you take that to the individual, you're personally responsible for your family. Yeah. So make sure that if your banks are going under, that you have an alternative that you can cover your family for 6 months. And if you're a government, you're personally responsible for your citizens, and you should have Bitcoin in your treasury. It's this is really important because it's a hedge against an old kind of currency, the fiat currency, that is no longer really serving us very well. And it's a good idea to have that hedge, have some Bitcoin. And if you don't, it doesn't take 100 hours. Just go buy some. Go to Coinbase. Get a ledger. If you get a ledger and you put your Bitcoin on that ledger, all of a sudden something comes very clear to you. You say, oh my gosh, my money is right here. Because, it's out in that ethereal bank thing.
That's the second thing. The first thing that happens is you just sit and you wait and say, is that transfer from Coinbase to the hard wallet actually going to happen? That 30 seconds is an eternity. But once you get over that first hurdle,
when I bought the U.S. Marshal's Office money, I waited on that money, and it was not 30 seconds. it was just short of an hour waiting for and after 30 minutes, the first block was approved. And you need 6 blocks to be sure you've got it.
Yeah.
So the first block was approved, and I thought, okay, I got 1 block. And then it took another 20 minutes for the second block. And then the other ones came fairly quickly. So yeah, it was, so 30 seconds is nothing.
Well, then you're going, where's that 800 number? And you go, there is no 800 number. That's the thing.
You always put $1 in, figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. We could talk about Bitcoin all day, and I love talking to true believers because I remember sitting into this, I think it was a Boston Consulting Group presentation back in the the early mid-90s, talking about this internet thing and TCP/IP and all these projections on how the world was going to change with all these different business executives. I was pretty young, and they were just kind of looking at it like it's hocus pocus. And what's funny, Tim, is in hindsight, all these wild projections they were making, they so underprojected.
Underestimated.
Right.
You
Incredible.
Bet. AT&T, long distance carriers were the center of all activity. It was like the Baby Bells or whatever they had after they broke up AT&T, the Baby Bells, they had all these long distance. They were making a fortune on long distance. And all of a sudden, Skype came in there, and I mean, there were other voice over IP, there were Vonage and whatever, but Skype wasn't voice over IP. So they sort of skirted the lobbying issue that Vonage had to deal with. But they grew to so many users that people stopped using the long distance carriers, like full stop. I think that's going to happen with banks. Banks are going to, they've been making a fortune off of you, and you are, you're paying your bank whether you know it or not. And the government's been making a fortune off just printing fiat money.
Yeah.
And you don't have anything to say about that except to vote. And with Bitcoin, you know where it is, you have it. And when you can buy your food, your clothing, your shelter, and pay your taxes all on Bitcoin, there will be no reason to hold any fiat, and people will run for the banks to try to get their fiat out, and they will be too late.
Yeah, and you think about the early internet days, you couldn't buy a share of the internet. You could buy shares of companies that were building applications on it. But with Bitcoin, it's almost like you can buy a piece of the network. And I think that's a difference I would see, and an exciting opportunity for people.
It makes me think of something else, which is way back historically, women would get jewelry so that they could take care of their family if their husband died or went off to war or to something. And it's weird that the women have been so slow to pick up Bitcoin because, jewelry, you get, I don't know, maybe you get half your money back from your jewels if you're lucky. And it was sort of a way of storing value and holding value. Now you've got a way of storing value, and it's liquid. You don't have to go to a jeweler and sell it at a 50% discount. It's liquid.
I have the marketing slogan for that. Digital jewelry.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. We market as digital jewelry, and then you go.
Perfect.
Get that group into it.
That's right.
Awesome. So, because it's the Venture Victory podcast, and I always end it with the same question, which is, what does it mean to you, whether in business, family, or life in general? What does it mean to be victorious in your eyes?
It's fleeting. That's what it is.
Yes, I think General Patton said that victory is fleeting.
Victory is fleeting because it always you've always got another mountain to climb, which is great because that makes life so interesting.
It keeps you exciting. Well, Tim, it was an honor to have you on board today. That's a wrap. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining. Cheers.
My pleasure.
The Venture to Victory podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our open executive roles or need help sourcing world-class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.